Executive function skills are these mental processes that help us to plan, focus our attention, remember instructions, and juggle multiple tasks successfully, right? So the metaphor I really like for executive function is really an air traffic control tower, right? You've got a busy airport, and traffic control centers are helping planes land, take off safely on multiple runways. And the brain, basically, when we talk about executive function, the brain is using these kinds of executive skills to filter distraction, prioritize certain tasks, right? Achieve certain goals, and control our impulses.
I talk about executive function skills with parents and foster parents more as school skills. So what kinds of things kids need to be ready for school, because I find that fairly universally parents and foster parents really want their kids to be successful in school.
Once a child goes to kindergarten, they all day are required to sit still, raise your hand before you talk, stand in a straight line, use your inside voice. All of those are executive function demands. So that's really important for school readiness. We know that it predicts math scores, reading scores, science throughout elementary school. And even when we measure executive function in preschool, it predicts to things like high school graduation, it picks to SAT scores, and even to age 40 outcomes. Wealth, your physical health, criminal offenses, drug abuse. We know that executive function is so important for a lot of really long-term outcomes, as well as being important for the immediate school context. And so if we can support executive function in these early years, we might really be able to get a handle on some of the things that we really care about down the road.
My advice for child protection workers and others in child welfare would be to have a fairly clear understanding of what you would hope to see in children as far as foundations for executive function skills and future executive function skills. What is a range of normal for a child? And then have in your mind, how can a particular child in a particular setting be supported with those skills?
Executive function starts very early in infancy with some really basic things like being able to get yourself to sleep and to be able to tell someone when you're hungry and regulate those kinds of bodily processes. And as you grow into the preschool years, you're able to be a little bit more controlled. And how that develops is through relationships with other people. So first, you get that external regulation. You get someone who can talk you through when you're upset. You get someone who's there for you, that you can go over for a hug if you feel upset. And then once that's happened a lot of times, the child's able to internalize that. And then they can do it all by themselves. Then they can have their own strategies and their own ways to calm themselves down. In a preschooler, we see kids starting to be able to follow more complex rules. And so you might be able to tell them, put on your shoes, put on your jacket, put on your hat. And that's a really big executive function task that a 1-year-old can't do, a 2-year-old can't do. But once we get into preschooler, they're able to have the memory and the reflection to say, this is what I've done, this is what I have to do next. Another really big process that changes is the ability to reflect. So to not just act on what the here and now, but to actually think about, if I do this, what's going to come next? And so those kinds of consequences and cause and effect, and the ability to pause a second and think about, what are my options and which one should I choose, instead of, again, just being impulsive or doing whatever comes easiest. Children who aren't showing good executive function skills can look lazy, they can look defiant, but sometimes it's really that they just don't have the skills yet. They're not able to do it. It's not their fault. It's not that they're trying to be, misbehaving, but sometimes it's really just a skill deficit. I think that's really important, just to understand that these are difficult and they aren't things that we can just assume children will kind of learn on their own.
For a lot of children involved in the child protection system, they will be struggling with executive function skills.
One thing specific to foster kids is that the number of placements has been found to be predictive of lower executive function skills. We think that it's some of that unpredictability, that instability in early life especially, might be really problematic.
There are several ways social workers can support the development of executive function skills. First, thinking about one of the underlying pieces of executive functioning, which is self-regulation. How can they help a parent help a child learn how to self-regulate? And that requires the parent to really be tuned into the child and also be able to keep themselves calm as a parent. And so starting there, knowing that your long-term goal is that the child is able to regulate enough to be able to be in a classroom setting or in a community setting, or to have positive experiences at home. Some things people can, or social workers can do to help include, naming that we're waiting, giving children an opportunity to think about what's coming next. If you can wait here for, a minute, then we're going to be able to go and get a drink of water. Really talking to children about what they're experiencing inside and understanding how hard it is for children to wait. And how they need a story about their waiting, or a song. There are songs that you can sing with kids about waiting, anticipating, those kinds of things. Because if you can build in a fun routine around it and give their body the experience of, waiting, delaying gratification, being flexible, changing their mind, being okay with someone changing their mind or changing the rules, you're really giving their body and their brain that experience and those skills to be able to use in school when those things are going to be happening all the time.
We've talked about how children internalize the external structure that they're given. And so if adults can provide an appropriate amount of external structure, that can be really helpful. So a lot of third graders can be counted on to pack up their backpack before they go to school, put everything they need, and go off to school. But children who don't have the executive function to plan ahead, to check those boxes off, it might be really helpful for them to have a visual aid, so that by your door, you paste a picture of a folder, a pencil case, and your lunch money, or whatever the 3 things you need. And that therefore, again, the child still has some independence. They get to do it themselves, but we've provided a little more structure. We've provided a little more of that external help so that the child doesn't forget it all. One thing that can be really troubling for kids with executive function disorders is transitions. So when you have to stop one activity and leave and start something else. And so some teachers or parents have come up with transition cues. So you might give the child a warning. It might be a little rhyme about we're almost done. It might be ringing a bell, but sometimes that can be really helpful for, again, creating a more predictable environment. And then also, we just know that practice is really helpful. And there's so many games and there's so many activities that kids probably do all the time that are really executive function games. So Simon Says is a really great one where you have to inhibit. If Simon doesn't say, you don't do it. And so kids who are impulsive, things like that, just have practice. Red light, green light, where you go when the light is green and you stop when the light is red. And one thing we know about these games is we want to always keep them challenging. So we want to make sure that the child can do it, but not quite do it all the way. And so we found ways to adapt these games to all sorts of different levels. So for 3-year-olds, when we're playing Simon Says, we use 2 puppets. And one bear puppet is the nice puppet and you listen to him. And we have a dragon puppet who's a very mean puppet and we don't listen to him. And so when they're coming from 2 different voices, it's easier for a child to do it, and that's at their level. And then as they master that, we can keep making it harder. There are a lot of disabilities that have been tied to problems with executive function. There's disabilities like ADHD, autism, learning disabilities, Tourette syndrome, PKU, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder. There's all sorts of things that have been tied to a lack of these skills and a lack of the ability to regulate yourself, figure out planning ahead, as well as calming down. And so these children, they might be really frustrating to adults because they seem like they're not living up to their potential. We know they're smarter than this. We know they know what to do. They're just not doing it. And that's the executive function. It's being able to put your knowledge into practice. And there's a lot of disabilities that affect the ability to do that.
Child protection workers don't have to be child development experts. They just have to know enough to ask questions and wonder and notice when things seem a little off, or trust a gut question in their own, a red flag in their own mind, and seek out help when they need it. I think it's important to realize what you're able to do within your role and when you need some extra help. So might that child benefit from being involved in an early intervention program or a therapeutic preschool program? If that's not available in a community, one of the things coming up more and more in our communities here are mental health consultation in childcare. So that's a time when a mental health consultant can go to a child's childcare setting and really help coach their daycare providers on how to support this particular child. Sometimes daycare providers and foster parents, all of us, can get frustrated if a child is having a hard time and can feel sort of like, I'm not sure what to do. Having an outside person come in and help understand, here's this particular child and what they've experienced and why you're seeing this behavior in this context, and then giving them some of those same ideas. Can there be a cozy corner for this child with a weighted blanket so that they can practice being calm? Can the child have a fidget toy? Can there be things like lotion and bubbles and other, breathing balls and things like that available to help this child in this particular setting learn some of those skills? And so really figuring out what can you do in your setting and when do you need to ask for help. It's important that parents and foster parents and caregivers understand that this is going to take a lot of repetition. It's going to take a lot of time for a child to act out in a certain way that they're used to acting out, or run around, or not be able to listen. And you can tell them and you can teach them, and it's going to take 800, 900, 1,000 times of doing that before they're really able to kind of solidify that. It takes a child who has not been exposed to trauma and toxic stress 8, 900, 1,000 times of practicing. There are, on the spectrum of typical development, there are lots of kids who are very busy and are not able to sit. They may be brilliant in some other ways. Their minds and bodies are working differently, and the rules of school are very hard for them. When you add in the experience of trauma or toxic stress especially onto a kiddo who's already, temperament-wise quite busy or interested in the world, it's an uphill battle, and it requires an immense amount of patience and perseverance on the part of caregivers to just stick with that child, not be rejecting and shaming that child as they're trying to learn, helping give them a story about it. You're working on your getting ready for school. At school, we sit crisscross applesauce and listen to stories. You did it today. You did it for a whole minute. Oh, today it was too hard to do it. Oh, well, we'll try again tomorrow, so that you're on that long-term, lifelong journey with that child and really helping instill in them the hope that they will get to the point where they'll be able to do school and just like the other kids.
Executive function is not fixed. It's not written in your genes. It's not a one-time chance. You can always change your executive function, even into adulthood. There's been a lot of intervention studies that show this, that if you change the child's environment, if you give the child practice, they can improve. And it's not a closed window at age 3. It's not a closed window at age 10. Through adolescence, these skills are developing. So if we can get parents to pay closer attention to their children, to really respond to what their children are doing, to, again, give them those choices, support their autonomy, we can even change children's executive function skills through their adult interactions. So there's tons of ways that we can change how the children's skills are presenting.
I can think of one particular kiddo I worked with who, when I first started working with him in a therapeutic environment, would come into the room and run around the room at 100 miles an hour and leap over desks and pull things off shelves, and he was very happy, but he was very wild. And we had to work really hard to one of the cores of executive function is self-regulation. So just to notice what he was doing and let us help him be calmer. And one of the ways that we worked on that was through some sensory experiences for him. So if he couldn't run around the room, because that wasn't safe for him or the other kids or the things in the room, could he do something with his hands or his feet, or could he sit on a wiggle ball or something so that he had an outlet for that same energy and yet wasn't destructive or unsafe with it? And then what we started to do is very slowly see, could we build on some of that time that he could be sitting, even if it was just for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds at a time, to give him some good positive feedback about that and could we build up his ability to pay attention to something? We just used a lot of external supports, what I would call almost environmental supports. How could we set up the environment so that he could practice and be more successful? So we at first used ourselves, our own bodies. If you think of children's babies' earliest experiences, they're held. And so as their reflexes and as their bodies are kind of flailing around, we swaddle them and wrap them up and hold them close. And that gives them a sensory experience of being safe and held, and someone else is sort of in charge. And we would do a lot of wrapping up in a quilt or deep pressure with bean bags, or we had weighted blankets or things like that. How could we give his body sort of a repairing experience of feeling that tightness and that safety, and what would that do for him? And for him, it helped his breathing slow down. It helped him kind of be able to focus a little bit. He really started to be able to attend to a story, attend to snack time, be able to sit there for, even a few minutes at a time, which really was going to set him up much better for school.
One thing we know about executive function skills is that they're plastic, which means that they're changeable. They're never stuck. They're never fixed. If you're delayed, that doesn't mean you can't catch up. So executive function skills are really responsive to the environment. Our brains are actually really responsive to the environment. So if your environment changes, your brain's going to adapt to that. And that gives your executive function skills a really good chance of adapting as well. So any age, if you have a supportive environment, your executive function skills can respond to that. And we have that. We can build in that predictability. We can build in that practice with these skills. And children are able to grow at any age. And even adults can grow as well. So our executive function skills are not something that's concrete like intelligence, where you're assigned a number and too bad for you, you have this number of executive function. Executive function is something that we can always practice, we can always grow, and we've shown that in our research, that it's something that's really responsive to interventions. So parenting interventions have worked really well. If we change how parents interact with their children, we can actually change the children's skills. So if we can get parents to pay closer attention to their children, to really respond to what their children are doing, to again give them those choices, support their autonomy, we can even change children's executive function skills through their adult interactions. So there's tons of ways that we can change how the children's skills are presenting.